London is becoming a battleground for conflicts that were never Britain's to fight. A capital city pulled into the orbit of overseas wars. Lives put at risk not by British extremists, but by the long reach of foreign regimes. And the warning that now echoes through Westminster is brutally direct. British lives are in danger. That message came from Iranian protesters, who say they are fighting not only to free their own country, but to save the UK from an Islamist threat they believe is already operating on British soil. Their plea exploded into the public consciousness on a winter night in Kensington, the night Britain discovered that its streets were no longer neutral ground.
It began with shouts, flashing lights, and a barricade pushed to its limit outside the Iranian embassy. Protesters gathered to challenge the Islamic Republic and to raise the flag their families are banned from flying at home. When a young man climbed the facade to replace the regime's emblem, police surged forward. What happened next still divides the city. Officers say they were provoked. Protesters say they were kettled without warning, crushed between metal barriers and the iron fence of Hyde Park. People scrambled up stone walls just to breathe. Elderly men were knocked down. Several were left with broken bones. 13 arrests turned into 14. And the emotion that swept through the crowd wasn't defiance, it was fear. But it didn't end at the barricades. Activists say police followed injured protesters to hospital, detained them in waiting rooms, and treated them as suspects rather than victims. To them, this wasn't policing, it was intimidation. And it looked, they said, uncomfortably similar to the regime tactics they fled.
What turned this into a national alarm was not the clash itself, but what followed. Iranian dissidents now claim that Britain has allowed sympathizers of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to live, organize, and influence narratives inside the UK. They argue that while protesters face kettling and batons, pro-regime networks move freely, shielded by charity status, diplomatic immunity, or political hesitation. And they warn that the inconsistency is not random, it is dangerous. Their message, repeated again and again outside Parliament, is stark. If Britain cannot protect the people who fled a regime, how can it protect itself from the regime's reach? And this warning arrives at a moment when the country is already strained. The Starmer government faces mounting pressure over protests, asylum policy, and the spread of foreign state influence. Counter-terror police are investigating targeted attacks on dissidents from other countries, and London is struggling to maintain order as overlapping geopolitical flashpoints spill onto its streets.
The Kensington clash is not an isolated eruption. It fits into a bigger fracture line running through Britain today. Crowds shutting down central London week after week, communities divided over asylum centres, violent incidents linked to overseas political movements, and the constant accusation that policing standards shift depending on who is marching. London has always been an international city, but now activists say it is becoming something darker, a staging ground, a place where foreign governments test influence, where rival exiles confront each other, where domestic policing is caught between public safety and international pressures. For Iranians who fled Tehran's dictatorship, the fear is personal. They say their families back home are interrogated whenever they speak out in the UK. They say they receive threats even in London cafes. And they warn that if Britain underestimates this threat, it will be repeating the same mistake that allowed the regime to grow powerful in the first place.
As the steel barriers are cleared from Kensington and the bruises fade from protesters' faces, the larger crisis becomes impossible to ignore. Because if London is now hosting the battles of other nations, if foreign regimes can intimidate British residents on British soil, and if the police response changes depending on the politics of the protest, then the question becomes unavoidable. Is Britain still in control of its own streets, or has the front line quietly moved to London without anyone admitting it?
Hundreds have been taken off London streets in a single blistering sweep. More than 900 arrests, executed in one coordinated operation, tearing through the West End with a force this city has not witnessed in years. And tonight, as police vans choke the narrow streets from Soho to Oxford Circus, one question hangs in the air.
How long has this been festering beneath the light of the capital's most famous district? It began before dawners moved fast, block by block, targeting mini-marts, vape shops, late-night takeaways, the very storefronts millions walk past every day without a second thought. Inside many of these units, investigators say, were the guts of a criminal economy, illicit tobacco stacked behind false walls, cash piles hidden under noose floorboards, ghost-managed companies masking illegal labour and funneling dirty money through the system. By mid-morning, London's West End was no longer the polished postcard version the world imagines. It was a crime scene, sprawling, chaotic, and deeply uncomfortable.
Sources inside the operation describe it as the largest high-street crime purge in modern UK history. Nearly 2,800 premises were visited and more than £10 million in criminal proceeds seized. That includes millions of illegal vapes, mountains of contraband tobacco, over £500,000 in cash, and significant quantities of cannabis. The arrests, now sitting at over 920 nationwide, tell only part of the story. What shocked investigators was the scale of the criminal infrastructure hiding behind these ordinary shopfronts. Months of intelligence work pointed to networks using ghost directors, fake leases, and illegal workers to keep operations fluid and almost invisible. For a district known for tourists, nightlife, and theatres, this was a jarring reminder that beneath the neon lights lies a parallel economy that has been quietly expanding.
For months, officials warned that dodgy shops were becoming fronts for organised crime, raking in billions from illicit goods while exploiting migrant workers. In a political climate already rattled by immigration debates, this crackdown lands like a grenade. Inside government, pressure is mounting. The Home Office, under scrutiny for rising illegal working raids and asylum pressures, now faces another storm. How did these networks become so deeply rooted in Britain's most heavily policed district? Security officials insist this West End sweep is not the final act. They call it Phase 2 of a nationwide intensification, with every police force in England and Wales now drawn in. Trading standards, HMRC, and immigration enforcement are moving in lockstep, trying to reclaim high streets that in some areas residents say they barely recognise anymore. Politically, the fallout is immediate. Labour MPs are demanding new powers to close rogue shops permanently. Reform UK is seizing the moment to argue that the government is soft on borders. Business owners, especially those who operate legitimately, fear this will fuel a climate of suspicion that punishes the innocent alongside the guilty. And through all of this, communities are asking how long these networks have operated unchecked. If so much criminal infrastructure existed in the heart of the capital, what does that say about towns where oversight is thinner?
Tonight, investigators are unravelling seized ledgers, forged IDs, cloned corporate document, and evidence of networks stretching far beyond London. Officials estimate organised crime generates £12 billion a year in Britain, money that disappears into offshore accounts and black market pipelines. This is more than a policing operation. It is a test of the high street's integrity, of Britain's border control, and of a political system struggling to reassert authority. If 900 arrests can happen in a single sweep, what else is still hiding in plain sight?
Not gets done there, bro. You're full of harassment for me. Not gets done. No, not you fucking plastic.
A 61-year-old grandfather named Peter Lynch is dead. He didn't pick up a weapon. He didn't hurt a soul. He was a man of previous good character who was sentenced to nearly 3 years for shouting in the street. He died in a prison cell the week away. At the exact same moment, Isaac Donko, a violent gangster known as Young Drizzy, walked out of prison gates with a smile on his face. Donko didn't just shout, he kidnapped a 16-year-old, threatened him with a machete, and attempted to pour a boiling kettle over his victim's head. Under the Labour government's early release scheme, this violent offender is now back on our streets, reportedly driving a 6-figure armoured truck. If you feel like the scales of justice in Britain have been tampered with, you're no longer a conspiracy theorist. You are simply paying attention. Today, we look at the official admission from the House of Lords that confirms what we all feared.
Two-tier justice is no longer a theory, it's a matter of public record. We've uncovered an astonishing extract from the House of Lords. The Justice Minister, Lord Ponsonby, was asked why non-violent protesters were receiving such staggering sentences compared to violent criminals. His answer should chill every citizen to the bone. He admitted that judges felt that even people of previous good character needed to be made an example of. Think about that. In a traditional courtroom, good character is a shield. In Starmer's Britain, it has become a target. The judiciary is no longer looking at the crime. They are looking at the message they can send to you. When the Prime Minister stands before a camera and says he expects strong sentences, the independence of our courts doesn't just tremble, it collapses. The government promised us that no violent offenders would be released early. They told us the scheme was for non-violent overcrowding issues. But Isaac Donko's release proved that was a falsehood. He was convicted of GBH and false imprisonment. By recategorizing his crimes, the system let a dangerous man walk free, while grandfathers and childminders remain behind bars for offensive tweets. Data shows we now lock up more people in the UK than almost anywhere in Western Europe, yet our streets feel less safe. Why? Because the system is focused on speech and examples, rather than protecting you from physical harm. Justice is supposed to be blind, but today in Britain it has its eyes wide open, choosing its targets based on political utility. Peter Lynch's death is a tragedy that demands an inquiry. The release of violent gangsters is a failure that demands a resignation. To the viewers who stayed, you see the disparity. You see the armoured truck versus the prison cell. Our promise to you is to keep digging through the Hansard records they hope you never read. We won't let this story be charity-washed or buried. The truth about two-tier Britain is now out in the open, and once seen, it cannot be unseen.
Pro-migrant supporters clashed with anti-migrant protesters following a court order in which a hotel in a London suburb will have to evict asylum seekers.
At 9:17 p.m. last night, the British social contract didn't just break, it ignited. While the mainstream media tries to label what is happening in 15 simultaneous cities as isolated unrest, the smoke rising over Tamworth tells a different story. It is the story of a government that has lost control and a Prime Minister who is choosing to manage the decline rather than serve his people. Last year, 111,000 asylum claims were lodged, the highest in our history. Today, £8 million of your tax money is being spent every 24 hours to house arrivals in 210 hotels across the country. The warning signs were flashing red from Epping to West London, yet the Home Office ignored their own internal memos. Tonight, we expose the data they tried to censor and the reality of a nation at its breaking point.
Let's look at the numbers that Whitehall is desperate to hide. Since this uprising began, over 1,800 British citizens have been detained, many arrested simply for being present or shouting in their own streets. Now, look at the other side of the ledger. In that same time frame, how many illegal arrivals, people who broke the law to enter, have been removed? Less than 300. That is 1,800 taxpayers in cells versus 300 deportations. This isn't an administrative error, it is the blueprint of a two-tier justice system. While pensioners are told they must freeze this winter because there is no money, the government continues to fund a hotel strategy that their own civil servants warned would destabilise communities. They aren't trying to stop the boats, they are trying to normalise them, scouting your town halls and military bases for the next new model of...
Why the censorship? Why the pressure on social media companies to delete footage of your own streets? Because Keir Starmer knows that if a family in the south sees the reality of what is happening in the north, the narrative of social cohesion collapses.
They are treating the British public not as citizens to be served, but as a population to be controlled. The fire in Tamworth was a warning. It was a symptom of a much deadlier disease, the total erasure of community consent. When you criminalise dissent, you make resistance the only language left. From harassment near schools to the tragic cases reported in Hounslow, the safety of your families has become a secondary concern to the requirements of international human rights courts.
The battle for the soul of Britain has moved from the ballot box to the high street. The government thinks that by arresting enough people and banning enough accounts, the anger will vanish. They are wrong. You cannot fix a broken contract with a press release or a censorship campaign.
To the viewers who stayed, you are the only variable left in this equation. The media, the politicians, and the police command have all picked their side. Now, you have to decide if you will wait until the coaches pull up in your town, or if you will demand that your country belongs to you. The days of polite silence are over. We will keep showing you the numbers they hide, because a country kept in the dark can never truly be free.